Welcome everyone. Happy Friday afternoon. Welcome to another edition of #AskRobCo. Hope you're all well. Hope you all had a good week. Hope you're all excited for the next 30 minutes, excited as I am. We are very, very, very lucky. We have a super guest with us today. Let me introduce to you Steve Wells, an experienced international speaker, futurist, strategist, facilitator, provides keynotes, presentations, seminars, works and done broadcasts for TV, radio, BBC, podcasts, and an array of institutions and businesses. Extremely excited to have you with us. Steve, welcome. Thank you for coming. And welcome to the show.
Brilliant to be here, Rob. Thanks very much for the introduction. Nothing to live up to there then.
So how we work is the audience have the option on the right hand side, as everyone knows, questions column. You write in the questions, we will give you the answers. Steve is going to tell us a bit about him, his journey, where he comes from, what he's been through, how he's got here, what he's doing, where he's going, and a whole array of things. As he's speaking, please feel free, send us your questions, then we will engage and answer those questions and talk about a range of subjects. So Steve, the floor is yours. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along. So my kind of life, really, we've got, I think Rob said about 10 minutes, so I'm probably going to skip some bits of it. But I think the real pertinent thing I think I'd like to concentrate on really is a notion that I often hear from other people, which is around what kind of career plan should I have? And the fact is, I've never had one, but I think I've been pretty good at identifying and taking opportunities. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about that. So I'm a futurist, and what I really enjoy doing is helping people think about how the future is emerging. And actually, there's more future emerging at us right now than ever before. And it's an absolutely fascinating time, I think, to be alive, notwithstanding the pandemic, although as a futurist, I'm not at all surprised that we've had a pandemic. Futurists have been talking about this as a major disruptive factor for decades, and here we are. And what we find is that the environment right now is changing the way we think about things. It's changing how we live our lives. It's changing how we work. It's causing us to think new ways about how we do business. So that's what I'm really interested in. I'm really interested in the future and helping other people think about the future as well. So I want to just take you back a little bit now into my earlier life, because I didn't go to university. I left school with A levels, and I started at a company called Pfizer down in East Kent when I was 18. And I had no idea really where I was going at that point. I was quite interested in working in finance, working for a big company, but I kind of found my way through the organization over a number of years. And it was only relatively recently, actually, that I realized that I had a kind of a 5-year itch, and it was associated with work and not exactly associated with boredom, but feeling like I needed to challenge myself differently. So although I was at Pfizer for a very long period of time, more on that in a sec, I never actually had the same job for more than 5 years. So I was interacting not only with kind of different skills, but with different people in different areas of what is a very big business. Now, if we roll forward, excuse me, to 2007, I was made redundant by Pfizer. Pfizer was going, like lots of big organizations do, through reorganization. And this was an absolutely fascinating learning point. And the one thing that I would really encourage absolutely everyone to do is look at every single experience they have and understand what the learning is. You know, what's the learning opportunity that represents? Because many people wouldn't think that I would enjoy the idea of redundancy, but I did. Now, what the company did was really interesting. So the company split us into those that were going, because there were several hundred of us going, and those that were staying. And it kind of forgot all about those that were staying and concentrated its efforts on those of us that were leaving, putting in place services to help us find other jobs, to find business opportunities, to see if there were new opportunities within the organization. What the company, and by company, of course, I mean senior people, what they didn't actually pick up was there were 4 groups of people in the organization around that time. I'm generalizing here. So out of the group that were staying, some of the people were relieved they were staying. Oh my goodness, the company still value me. It saved my life, kind of thing. But some of the people who were staying were actually disappointed. They really thought that the idea of being made redundant and going to do something different would have been a tremendous release, a new opportunity. And you had similar people who were actually leaving. So some of the people that were leaving were desperately sad and wondered what they were going to do. They felt let down by the company, felt unwanted, not needed. I actually felt really excited about it. So excited, in fact, that on more than one occasion, I was justifying the company's decision to make me redundant to people that were staying in the organization. So that was an absolutely fantastic learning opportunity about
Let,
how organizations change and how they react to big events and how they treat their people.
Steve, let me interrupt at that point. Sorry. Let's understand or try and go a little deeper into why you felt the way that you felt at that moment in time. So you've got to this stage in life. Now, had you historically embraced bad news, failure, disappointment in a positive way? Are there tipping points prior to that that led to that? Or was that the first time in your life you'd behaved that way?
Okay, I mean, the first thing to say is I didn't see that as bad news. So that part of the question I can't apply. There's one thing that I learned a long time ago, and that is that we need to kind of focus our energies on what we can control rather than what's outside of our control. So I think that really helps. The other notion that I hold dear is that actually we don't resist change, but we resist being changed. So those 2 issues around what we can control, what we can't control, and that aspect of change, I think set me to be reasonably stable, I suppose, in unstable situations. That's not to say I don't get frustrated, disappointed, sad, unhappy, and all those things. But I think the really big things that happen, I'm able to manage me better than maybe some other people can manage themselves for those 2 things.
So you just said something really important there, and I really want people to understand what you actually mean by what you've said. We don't resist change, we resist being changed. What do you mean by that?
So the redundancy is a really good example. So those people that were told they were no longer required, that was a big change, and they had absolutely no influence on that change at all. However, a number of senior people in the organization had obviously made that decision. So that was a decision they were in control of. That was a change they were in control of. And the way it was received by people was a change being done to them. And I think that's why it's vitally important. If we think about change management, change leadership, that's why it's vitally important to actually engage people with appropriate conversation through any change program. Because how do you bring people with you, the people that you need to make sure the change is embedded and the organization is successful afterwards, unless they buy into the change itself? And we far too easily, I think, forget that change should be about people, not process and systems. It should be about people.
Brilliant, love that. Let's carry on.
So having been made redundant, I very quickly, and I mean, when I first heard, my boss actually called me on my mobile when it was kind of okay to drive and take a mobile phone call. And he let me know what was going on. I was driving back from Birmingham at the time. And by the time I got home, I was excited about the prospect and decided to start my own business. Now, part of that was because I'd sort of been in an internal consulting role inside the organization. So I already had clients. So I had a bit of an idea. And it just felt absolutely right for me at that point in 2007 to go and do something different. So that's what I embraced. Through my latter years at Pfizer, I'd got involved in foresight and future studies, run a couple of projects within the organization, and really wanted to take that outside and put my own spin on that. So that's what I did. I started working with organizations both in healthcare, increasingly with organizations outside of healthcare. And then in 2015, a friend of mine that I'd known for a long time said, look, I've got a good idea for a business. Well, I think it's a good idea. He was a futurist as well. And he said, I want to bring books to market that help people make sense of the future. Neither of us had had anything to do with publishing before. So we said, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So we were able to concentrate and put a lot of effort into our first project. And our first project was bringing a book to market called The Future of Business, which we did in, I think it was about 20 weeks. And that was from the initial project inception through to publication. And traditional publishers told us it would take 18 months to 2 years. So by looking at what we needed to do, the way we wanted to do it, to challenge maybe some of the existing traditional processes, we kind of absolutely smashed through what was perceived to be the normal timeline for doing that kind of project. And we managed to ship out about 10,000 copies of that book. Subsequent to that, we published, I think it was 8 books by the time I actually left that business earlier this year, because my 5 years was up. And I decided to come and do something a little bit different as well. So you see this kind of pattern of mine ever since I was 18, really. There's been this kind of 5 years. What do I do now? And I just find it really invigorating to do something different.
Let's focus on that. Like 5-year itch. What does that mean? Is that for you only? Does everyone go through that? How do you know it's coming? What behavior patterns are there? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So we'll get rid of the easy question. Is that the same as everyone? Absolutely no idea. I kind of suspect it's very personal. Otherwise, we wouldn't have some people even now staying within the same organization for most of their working lives, and we wouldn't have other people with 7, 8, 9 different careers through their working life. So I think it's a very personal thing. What do I notice that's happening at the point I get my 5-year itch? I start to get a little bit frustrated, not with anything big and not massively frustrated, but it's just little things that, particularly inside that big organization, made me feel that it was stopping me. The culture was stopping me. The idea that it actually takes so much effort to persuade other people to do something different is just so much hard work. The other thing is a lot of corporate life operates kind of on a cycle basis. So one of the things that I did was manage the strategic planning process, which is an annual process. Elements within that process are brilliant because we look outside the organization, we look into the future and try to make sense of what that might mean for our business as we move forward. But so much else was routine. And I do enjoy working with ideas, and I do enjoy just kind of experimenting and coming up with something new. So when things get routine, that's when I start feeling the itch. And the only way to scratch it is to go and do something different.
So that takes us up to now, today, this year, COVID 2020. Where are you at?
Well, COVID. Now I might be a little bit weird, or this might seem a little bit strange, and I don't want to be necessarily put into the same box as Labour politicians, but the pandemic has been a fascinating experience, and one that I think we should all be observing across from a very broad perspective. So what I mean by that is, if as a society, as a global society, we wanted to know what happens when a pandemic kicks off somewhere, when some kind of unseen infection comes into the human population, this has been it. And what's been absolutely fascinating is that we wouldn't have a global pandemic without aviation. So aviation has been the reason why we've had a global pandemic. The other thing that we've been able to do is look at the genetic markers inside the slightly different strains of the disease. So we know, for example, in the UK that the majority of early infections didn't come from China, they came from Italy and they came from France. So you get a feeling of the pattern of how an infection like coronavirus can work its way through the population. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's kind of starting to challenge us about how we navigate to a new landscape. And what I mean by that is, how do we really do the things that people are talking about new normal? Now, I hate the phrase new normal because normal is always relative. And actually, when we think about it, normal doesn't stay normal for very long. So it's a weird way to talk about it. But if we look at the lessons we're learning, how does society respond to this? When we first came across the pandemic, it was a health crisis. Very quickly, it became an economic crisis. Actually, it's now become a societal crisis. And then we think about it, it's actually all three of those. So no wonder the decisions that government takes all around the world, all governments, are very complex and they're very hard to get right. But it's also accelerating a number of trends that we've seen operating in the environment for some time. The introduction of automated systems, the way that we work in different ways. So explosion of the gig economy as things start to change around jobs, remote and distant working, the new way that we interact with retail. All these things were already trending. But when you look at the stats now of what's happened, particularly around retail during the summer, then that's probably changed the way we shop for good. And one of the things as a futurist that absolutely fascinates me is, what do we think about infrastructure investment in the future that will have changed as a result of the pandemic? How many new office buildings do we need? How many big stores do we need? How do we need to provide infrastructure to support automated systems, both around shopping and around delivery? And then what do we do with connectivity infrastructure to ensure that remote working, it works adequately and well to ensure that we can keep building business? So
Right.
that's some of the things that I thought have emerged as a result of the pandemic. If you get me started on that, you'll need much more than half an hour.
So what are you actually doing now with your post new recent itch? What are you doing moving forward, and what's 2021 and beyond bringing for you?
Okay, so typically I do three things in my business. I give keynote presentations, typically to mixed audiences, sometimes to corporates, which tends to be about how the emerging future is impacting a particular sector. I also do a bit of consulting, not a great deal of consulting, but that's predominantly about a bit of research about what are the change drivers and how might we see those impacting, again, particular sectors. The other thing that I do, and actually I really enjoy this, and I'll tell you about a project that I've just been working on. It's actually what I call executive education around foresight. And that's helping organizations and people within organizations gain an understanding of the processes that we go through when we undertake future studies or use foresight. Now, that's the kind of the pieces that I deliver to clients. What I'm really excited about doing at the moment is actually sharing a broader perspective around change and foresight. So there's a number of things that I'm doing that actually don't earn me any money at all, but I find intellectually, professionally stimulating. So one is, I have a group of people that are engaged in some form of organizational change, whether it's change management, organizational change, coaching, leadership. And we come together about once a month to talk about some of the underlying drivers and some of the topics that we think are important in the context of change and how foresight can inform change. And the other thing I'm just about to kick off is a series of really short podcasts where actually I'm going to be interviewing people and getting them to talk about their professional area, again, in the context of foresight. So that might be about coaching, it might be about sustainability, it might be about health and well-being, and so on. So those are the pieces that I find are really stimulating. And one of the things that I know in doing those is that it will expand my knowledge about these other people's, these other professionals' areas, and it will help me expand my network and hopefully help to create business later on. Now, the
Brilliant.
thing I've just been working on is one of these executive education pieces. And I've been doing some work with a client in Malaysia where I delivered a foresight program, a 4-day foresight program. Think before you work with Malaysia, because they're 8 hours ahead and it means you get up at 5 a.m. Other than that, it was a brilliant experience to work with a different and an emerging market, and one that has a really incredible sense of sophistication in terms of what they want to achieve as a nation in the future. And being able to kind of share the experience of how people learn and coach them along and get them to challenge themselves about how they think about the future was really, really rewarding. I loved it. I ran a kind of a much smaller version of that for a number of public sector organisations in the northeast of England, 2019, I think that was, where we actually used a foresight exercise as an indicator of one of the leadership skills we would need to develop in the future.
Fascinating. I think, you know, you cover so many areas that, like you said, we could talk for hours and hours and hours. Let's get through some questions and get some further insight. So, what have I got here for you? Steve, failure and suffering is a learning and growth opportunity. Can you share with us some more moments in your life relating to that and your viewpoint on that subject?
So I suppose to some extent I've been reasonably lucky and reasonably well organized to avoid any major failure. I always think that failure is kind of it's a great way to learn, isn't it? How do I sometimes put this? That, you know, making mistakes is human and they're great learning opportunities. If you repeat the mistake, then actually that's a bit careless. So, you know, I try to hold from that. I genuinely think of almost every interaction, almost every exercise as an opportunity to learn. How do I feel about failure at the point of failure, even if they're relatively small failures or if they're, you know, kind of disruptions to my life? You know, the same as everyone else, I guess. You know, it feels inside you, whether it's in your heart, whether it's in your gut, whatever it is. I get all those feelings. But then I lean back on, is this change I'm resisting? What can I do to make sure I'm in control of the change? What are the elements I can control and what can't I control? And therefore, how can I kind of push those aside? You know, not completely ignore them, but realize that they're just context. And how I feel about things is actually something that's in my head and isn't outside of me. So
Brilliant.
without any real big failure to think about, falling out of a tree when I was about 8 and ripping my cheek open might be one, I suppose. But
You didn't do
you know, nothing professionally that really strikes me.
How do you feel technology will integrate with the human race in the near future?
Oh, one of my favorite subjects. Thank you, whoever that was. So there's a notion that that I've been working with some colleagues for a couple of years now, and it's about how do we encourage people to enable a very human future. And the basic notion here is that the current trend, the current track that technology development is on, represents a big red flag to me. We have to bear in mind that we could cede control of almost everything we do to machines. And this goes back really to artificial intelligence, how artificial intelligence is developing and how it could develop into the future. So the challenge here is, what interventions do we need to put in place? What informed choices do we need to make in order to ensure that some of these technologies are enabled for everyone across society? And to some extent, we've seen evidence of that through the pandemic. So if you're reasonably well off, if you have access to good quality internet connection, if you have great devices, you can work remotely from home. But if you're in a lower paid job and you have a smaller house and you have family around you, you know, all those kind of, it's really difficult, even if you have access to the technology. So the technology and the social piece really comes together. So a very human future is about what are the choices that we need to make in order to ensure that technology isn't misused and is used for the benefit of humanity. Now, sometimes, you know, you can equate the potential power of technologies like AI to the potential power of nuclear weapons. The big difference here is nuclear weapons reside in governments and powerful artificial intelligence technologies reside in corporations. And the motivation for corporations is, of course, profit. So I suspect that we're heading into the mid to longer term future into some kind of new way where there's a deal between society and technology companies that allows technology to come out in a way that rewards the innovation, but also makes sure it's spread much more democratically, if you like, throughout the population. And I think one of the really interesting templates that we can use to think about this in the future is actually the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because what they do, they lead us towards a very balanced perspective about humanity's place in the world. So we need to protect the environment to ensure that there's a way for humanity to exist in the future. And we need to think about things, including the resources that we have, including the cities, the communities that we build, and how we make sure that those are there for everyone, as well as eradicating poverty, hunger, and those kind of things. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I think, are a social perspective on how we might evolve into the future, which includes paying attention to the technological backdrop.
Fascinating. Like, I mean, it is the most fascinating subject matter. The positives, the negatives, the internet, technology, AI, the advancements that we're embarking on currently, like you said, and where that's all heading over the next 10 years. It is just so exciting, and to be part of a world that is going to have those advancements is exciting and should be embraced by all, even if there are some negatives and some challenges. The positives are going to be life-changing and game-changing, and really exciting for us to see. Normally, to close out things, I love to know what impact you want to have on the world, what change you would like to have over the world, and in everything that you're doing and sharing, and the great insight and the great knowledge that you have over the coming decades, and ultimately what message you want to send the listeners away with today, so that they have a good, positive, happy weekend ahead. So if you can go through those 3 points one by one, that would be amazing.
Sure. So in terms of what kind of impact I'd like to have on the world, I think having more people understand the choices that we have to create a more human future. Part of that is about helping people think about the future and think about the choices that we have. I think it's also about changing what we do with education. So focusing education more on softer skills and together with STEM, so that we have the ability to build the technologies, run the technologies, use the technologies, but also focus on those skills that are inherently human and the things that the machines will take longer to do. So I think that's all wrapped up in the notion of a very human future. So, you know, if I hear other people talking about a very human future, brilliant. I think the other thing is we have to, and I'd love to see people becoming not completely relaxed about working with uncertainty, but accepting that working with uncertainty is our reality. So the notion that things will continue to be the same, that we'll go back to use this horrible phrase, normal after the pandemic, you know, that won't happen. Normal doesn't exist. Normal is constant change.
I have to interrupt there, because it is the message that I repeat week after week after week after week for the past few years. You know, uncertainty is a certainty and the new certainty, and anyone that's living their life believing that all they want is certain conditions and a certainty on how they're going to live their lives, they're mismanaging their mindset and setting themselves up for disappointment. Understand that the world that we live in is forever changing, and that's a good thing and it's positive, and that we need to be agile and flexible and prepared and ready for those changes to manage and condition ourselves for those things happening. That's the right way, or a good approach to life in general, in any way, shape, or form. Sorry to interrupt.
No, we were chatting before, weren't we? And I completely agree with you. So the very final thing is that everyone watching, listening today, take a couple of minutes each day and find something about the future, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on the BBC website. Just watch a couple of really short videos. Places like Mashable, the World Economic Forum, innovative engineering, you know, there are lots of places to find this, and it just helps you understand and keep track of the kind of innovation that we're seeing. And I think that's incredibly motivating, because you know, the future is just a stunning place to want to be, and I think we should all do what we can to be there.
Amazing, love that. Super positive, great message. Steve, you've been brilliant. How can everyone watching or listening or seeing this, how can they reach you, see you, and follow your brilliant human future path?
So the easiest way to do it is to find me on my website, which is simply informingchoices.com. Everything leads to and from there.
Amazing, brilliant. You've been great. Really appreciate your time.
Very
Great
welcome.
insight. Great insight. Hope that's left everyone with a really good, positive outlook for the weekend. Please, everyone, stay safe, stay well. Thank you for following us on all the platforms, whether it's the webinar, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, everything. Really appreciate your support, your help, your insight. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you same time, same place next week. Friday, 1 p.m. #AskRobco. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend and be safe, be well, and look after yourself. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers.